Well, okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live stream. And today I have a very special guest, Dr. Ken Ginsburg. Ken, do you want to say hi to our audience?
Hello, it's honestly a pleasure and a privilege to be speaking to you today.
So Ken is joining us from the East Coast of the US. Is it Philadelphia or
Philadelphia,
Pennsylvania?
yes. Philadelphia is the city, Pennsylvania is the state.
Which city are you living in?
Philadelphia.
Oh, you are in Philadelphia. Wonderful. All right. So I'll just say a few words of who Dr. Ginsburg is, and then we'll get to a conversation I very much look forward to. And before I get started, I want to say the reason we have this conversation is because Dr. King's new book, Building Resilience in Children and Teens, in Chinese called 韧性成长, is being introduced into the China market, and then that's why I have this privilege. And why he was able to write this book because he is a doctor himself, and his specialty is adolescent medicine. So has been practicing that for now over, is it 35 years?
Almost
Um,
40. Yeah.
oh, yeah. In at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And he's also a professor of pediatrics at University of Pennsylvania, Pearland School of Medicine. And this book, as a result, if you will see when you get the book in yourself for the cover, it says and you're basically recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics. And this is so first of all, he's an adolescent doctor. And also he has founded the Center for Parent and Teen Communication. And in that capacity, he has put out multiple books, including Raising Kids to Thrive and and Reaching Teens. And also, of course, this is the fourth edition right now and has been super popular within not only the professional community, but also the parent community. In addition, he's a father of two young adults. And I have seen now, can I see the picture of your two baby girls, right? Is that when they
Uh,
were little?
When they were babies.
How old are they now?
Now they're 29, so they're bigger. They don't both fit in the same stroller anymore.
What a disappointment. Anyway, so he's a father of two girls, and I think during the time he was writing all those books is when he's a parent himself to teenage children. So I think both this capacity made him truly qualified, right, to talk about this topic, both as a father himself and also as a practicing doctor for almost 4 decades of experience for adolescent. So Ken, maybe let's get to the beginning of it. Like when the first edition of this book came out, when you first started writing this book, what motivated you? Why? Why did you kind of branch out from a practicing MD and seeing patients in your medical rooms to writing a book to the parents?
Yeah, so I still do see patients, and that is what centers me and what I care and love about the most. But my job serving adolescents is to try to think about all the things that will make a difference to their health. But when we're talking about health, it's important you want to understand we're not just talking about our body. When we're talking about human health, we have to think about thriving. We have to think about emotional health. We have to think about behavioral health. We have to think even about academic health. What does it take for people to succeed and to be prepared to lead us into the future? So, all of that is health. And there gets to be a point where, as a doctor, you tend to see things when things are not going well. And when things are not going well, the real question that makes a difference in whether a young person will have things go well in the first place, and then whether they can turn things around when things are not going well, is will they have an adult on their side? Will they have an adult who really knows how to raise them? So when that became really clear to me, after working with lots of young people in distress, was that if I could build a career where I helped adults become the kind of people that young people deserve and need, but deserve in their lives, they will be healthier. So I work both with professionals. I do a tremendous amount of training with youth serving professionals about how to lift kids up. But if you're going to get to the base, if you're going to get to what's really going to produce a healthy human being, it's about parents and caregivers, grandmas and grandpas and aunts and uncles and parents. And it's about getting as early as you can, which is why, even though I'm an adolescent doctor, the book you're holding up isn't about just teenagers. It's about how you work with and raise a child from the very earliest ages.
Yeah. Thank you. No, I think you said it very beautifully. I think I remember which I don't remember which chapter saying like you feel like it didn't work to help pick up pieces once it's broken.
Right.
Right. But how do we kind of avoid it from being broken to begin with?
Amen. That's right. Right.
Yeah, and then thank you. So then if I get to the chase, because I think there are many anxious parents waiting, listening to this one as well. Like, what are the common problems you see when the patients showing up in your office, and what does it say about their parents?
Well, let me answer the second part first. Um, Yinuo, yes, I do believe parents are part of the solution. And I do believe that sometimes parents might even be part of the problem. I do believe that. But what I don't want anyone to believe for a minute is that a problem a child has is necessarily caused by the parent, right? And parents are always part of the solution, always. Parents can always raise their kids to have a very strong sense of worthiness, which will help them get through things. So let's start with one of my favorite points. Good parents do not raise perfect children. A perfect child doesn't exist. A child without problems doesn't exist. Good parents are the ones who show up, stand by their child, love them without condition, and get them through their struggles. So let's start with that. Parents are always part of the solution. Sometimes they could have done things better. So what do I see? I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm a pediatrician. So I see kids with headaches and chest pain and fatigue. I see kids who sometimes absolutely can say, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm worried. But more often, they're coming to me with belly pain. And it's for me to discover that they really have a tremendous amount of anxiety. And what I am seeing a lot, and doctors across the US are seeing, are kids with higher levels of anxiety and sometimes depression. And anxiety does more than make you distressed or uncomfortable. It interferes with your well-being and your ability to succeed, because anxious people kind of hold themselves back and they don't take chances. And the way you really succeed in the world is to stretch and to be willing to fail and to be able to take constructive feedback. And anxious people don't do that.
Thank you, thank you. And I want to go back to what you said. I think it's golden. You said, what is a good parent? And first of all, a good parent does not raise perfect children, and perfect children do not exist.
Do not.
And second, you actually mentioned, I think, a keyword that came many times in this book. Again, for our audience, you can find this book in the link below. And even on the cover of the book, at least it's on the Chinese version of the cover, says that, basically, a good parent offers children both unconditional love and at the same time holds high expectations of them, right?
Yes.
I think it's really, sort of really striking the point of what you just said. But both of them, I think it's easy to understand, but it's hard to do. Like, what is unconditional love? Like, if they want a toy, anytime I'll just buy it, whatever on their Christmas wish list. I say yes, is that unconditional love? And then what is
No.
high expectations, right? Like, so I expect you to get full marks on all your tests. Is that
Mhm.
high expectation? Yeah, please elaborate. What do you mean
Yeah.
by
So,
both
so
these words?
yeah, so this is not going to be a 1 minute answer. Like we're getting
Yes.
to a real conversation here. So the first thing is unconditional love is not unconditional liking. Liking is what you approve of. Love is what human beings know that they're really good humans, right? So loving is about seeing your child as they really are and not going and refusing to go anywhere. Like you're just like loving them, caring about them, seeing them as they really are, right? So let's take it up to a really high level. Why, Yinuo, do we love? We love so our children know they are worthy of being loved. A human being who knows, like, I'm like 63, right? So a 63-year-old, a 65, a 70-year-old, you have two kinds of people. People are always waiting to get caught, always feeling bad about themselves, or people who know that they're worthy of love and of healthy relationships. The root of that is whether your parents were unconditional in their loving of you. Now, loving is different than liking. Liking is something really subjective. And liking also is what a friend does, not a parent. And being your child's friend is a terrible mistake because adolescents worry about their friendships. Friendships are something that can come and go. You have to behave a certain way to be accepted. Parents aren't going anywhere. You're stuck with us, right? Now, let's talk about high expectations and how those two concepts come together. So, high expectations are not about grades. They're not about trophies. They're not about performances. In fact, respectfully, if you make it about that, that's pretty much a way to make it very likely your kid's going to be very anxious. High expectations are about holding a person to being their very best self. This gets back to unconditional love. Parents know who their kid is. Because when they were 2 years old, were they generous and compassionate? Did they have tenacity, a little bit of healthy stubbornness, right? Are they resilient? Are they grateful? Are they kind? This is what parents know better than anybody. And we hold them to the expectation of being their best self. If we do that by talking about what we see that's positive, that's real, that's them. That's them. And then we say, all I want is for you to be your best self. When we have those expectations, kids can meet those expectations. If your expectations are about grades, some can, but some can't. And for the ones who can't, they're going to feel like failures, which is a terrible way to launch into adulthood. And for those who can, kids like me, who coming up had an enormous amount of pressure in my life, right? But you know what that made me do? Meanwhile, what that made me do was go into exams and go blank. The anxiety shut me down. The pressure didn't make me get better grades. It prevented me from getting good grades.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so true for probably for many of the our parents here too. Because I think in Chinese culture or probably in the entire East Asian culture, this whole thing about high expectations and then measure them by grades is very prevalent. And people would see, like even if sometimes, as you say, like, well, you become the best version of yourself, and people are saying, oh, that's just an excuse because you couldn't score a high mark. I
It's
think,
I'm
go
going to
ahead.
make a suggestion and you're going to tell me if it's culturally inappropriate or appropriate because I don't live in China. Um, I tell parents to stop looking at the child in front of them and to begin imagining the 35, 40, or 50-year-old you're developing. Because when we do that, then we can begin producing kids who are going to be authentically successful and lead us into the future. So the problem is, if you focus only on grades and you determine that a human being is successful by their grades now, you actually sometimes undercut or undermine those things that make a 35-year-old successful. So let's list them. They're happy, but they're not happy because they have a cookie. They're not happy because they got a good grade. They're happy because they're in relationship with other people. They're happy because they feel like they have a purpose in the world, that they have a meaningful existence. Successful people know how to collaborate, know how to come up with creative ideas. Successful people can take constructive criticism because on the job, when someone gives you advice, you can't shut down and cry. You have to grow. And if you're going to grow, you have to be able to accept the constructive criticism. Successful people are resilient. They can bounce back when times are tough. And I believe, and I know that this is where Chinese culture is far, far better than the culture I live in, that ultimately success is interdependence, belonging to each other across the generations, thinking not only about ourselves and our independence, but how we relate to people. So we laughed at these, what are these? 14-month-old girls who are now 29. These 29-year-olds are now my best friends. When they were 13, would have been a terrible thing to say. They didn't need a friend, they needed a father. Now we belong to each other. Less than an hour ago, one of them came in and we hugged each other for like a couple of minutes and like we have fun together. That's interdependence. In a not very long time, they'll be taking care of me. What gets us there? What gets us there is parenting in a way where we are loving guides. They always want us in their life. They know that we are accepting of them. When we are demanding, when we are controlling, and when we tell them that they are only acceptable under a certain condition, guess what? When they're older, if they're not living in that condition, they're gone from our lives because they don't think that we belong together. We have to let our families know that that is a sacred bond.
Yeah, that's so touching. And I love this point because frankly, that was the first point that really struck me when I opened the book, because that's what Ken just talked about in parenting for the 35-year-old is the first chapter of this book. If you have the book, and again, you can find it in the link below. It's the very first chapter, and then it's eye-opening, and it's like almost a wake-up call, right? And saying like we're not parenting for the child in front of us, we're parenting for the 35-year-old adult, and that's the end goal, right? So that's the end of the curve, and put your eyes there. And then that's basically how Ken started this book, and then using that as the anchor point, so to speak, and look back. Then what do we need to do as of now? Like even from the 19-year-old in the stroller, or the 19 months old in the stroller, or maybe whatever your age is. I'm actually curious if you can type probably the age of your children in the chat room right now. We can probably see it, and then yeah, I'm sure there's a wide range of age. But basically, if we have our eyes on the 35-year-old, then we have equal footing, right? So everybody can start thinking from that angle. So do get a copy of this book. And again, that's the very first chapter that Ken mentioned. And Ken, thank you for that, for all that very golden advice. And I just want to plug in and saying that all those sentences that you feel like you're enjoying hearing, just like myself, I'm sure you're like me, you're nodding your head when Ken was speaking. They can all be found in the book. And the book itself, I think, frankly, Ken, it's not a offense to you, but I think the Chinese version is done better. The reason I think whatever the publisher did, they did a good job, highlighting and also clear chapters, and also really put very nice forms and tables into the book with clear chapters and also clear highlights. So it's a more interesting reading experience, although I read both the English version and the Chinese version. So do get a copy of the book, and you can find many of the wisdom here. And then what Ken mentioned earlier around stress, and then the fact that you went blank was in chapter 5. And chapter 5, the title is Stress and Its Effects. That's exactly where Ken laid out what does stress do to us, and how do we, it's like, it isn't a life without stress, but how do we have a healthy relationship with it? And also as parents, how do we avoid putting too much of it in there as well? So if you don't mind, can you say a bit more about stress? Because this is also a very common word I heard from my readers and parents in China. And I would say it's stress both for the children and for the parents as well. I think parents suffer a lot from managing this relationship once they get to the teenage years. So can you say a bit more of what's in this chapter, and also, of course, it's mentioned several times in the book?
I would love to. Let's back up before I get to stress specifically, because you talked just now about parental stress. And let me tell you that parenting for the 35-year-old actually reduces parental stress. I'll tell you why. It's not just that it reduces parental stress because you're thinking about authentic relationships and you're not thinking that you're determined as a successful parent by what your 9-year-old is doing in school, right? But it's more than that. When you're parenting for a 35-year-old, then the most important thing actually is to model what a healthy 35-year-old looks like, which means that part of the parenting prescription becomes taking care of yourself and showing what it means to be healthy. And a lot of parents have trouble hearing that advice, at least in the US, trouble hearing that advice because they're so focused on their children that they feel like time for themselves is selfish. And I'm going to tell you the opposite. Children, especially teenagers, want their parents to be emotionally healthy. And they look to their parents for models of what it looks to be healthy. So, in fact, taking care of yourself is not a selfish act. It is a strategic act of good parenting, and it's good for you too. So, with that said, let's talk about stress. Stress is actually a biologic phenomenon, and understanding that actually helps us learn how to manage it. So, remember that, 50,000 years ago, we were all at the edge of the woods or the edge of the forest, and we were all scared of lions or tigers or bears or wolves or whatever you have. And what that means is that what a human being is biologically programmed to react to stress. So imagine you're at the edge of the woods and you are just munching on some berries and you see a wolf. What are you supposed to do? You're supposed to run. Yeah. What's the first feeling you're going to have, Yinuo? The first feeling, not emotion, but in your body, the first thing you feel is butterflies in your belly. Do you call them butterflies in Chinese? Do you know what I mean?
Similar, yes.
Yeah, that feeling. What is that? That is literally the blood leaving your belly to quickly go to your butt muscle so you can jump, and then your leg muscles so you can run. That is the most fun fact I know as a doctor. Then what happens? Then your pupils get big. So even if it's dark, you can run. What happens then? Your heart beats fast, so you can pump that blood. You perspire or sweat to cool off while you're running. Here's the important part. You can't think because during times of most stress, you're not supposed to turn to the tiger or the wolf or the bear and say, why do you, let's work this out. Let's figure it out. And you know what else you're supposed to do? You're not supposed to turn to the predator and say, help me understand why you want to eat me. So, Yinuo, this is key because the two most important elements of human resilience are to be able to think and plan and connect with another human being. And during times of maximal stress, you can't do either. Knowing this gives us a starting point. So let's go back to me being 17, taking a test, having my father's voice in the back of my head saying that that test will determine my life. What happens is that test becomes a tiger. So literally, not figuratively, literally, instead of the blood being in the part of my brain where I can think, the blood is in the part of my brain where I'm running from the tiger and my butt instead of my thinking. And as a result, you go blank, right? And then when you're believing that a test is a tiger or your mom being mad at you is a tiger, you don't have the best relationships. So we want our kids to care. Like, please don't have anybody in China think that I'm saying you shouldn't care about school. You shouldn't care about academics. I'm not saying that. I'm saying be thoughtful and understand how to produce real success. And real success begins with knowing what is a real tiger and a paper tiger. So that's how we begin to think about stress. We begin to what's called reframing it, to seeing it differently, right? Um, and that allows us to tackle problems. Then the book, as you know, has about 100 pages, at least in the American version, which isn't as good as the Chinese version, I'm told, right? And but at least in that version, we have about 100 pages just on different ways to teach kids to manage stress. Because what you're never going to be able to do is make it go away. It's human existence. So telling people to ignore stress is not to create a good human. And telling people it doesn't exist is a lie. So the successful thing we do is create people to be able to really put things in perspective, but also manage stress when it's real.
Hmm. Thank you. And I like that. No, I learned something. I didn't know it goes to the butt.
So that's your jumping muscle. That's your jumping muscle.
Exactly. That's your glue, huh? Yeah, you have to go from there. Exactly. So if we want our kids to do good on tests, don't stress them. That's how our body react to it. And thank you for that very vivid illustration. And then I think it's also, I mean, frankly, when I was reading your book, and one of the constant feeling I have is that on the one hand, is talking about something very profound. On the other hand, it's talking about something very simple, right?
Mhm.
So it's profound, but it's also very fundamental. But sometimes you feel as a parent, you kind of lost in between, right? Because you have your own life stress going on, like like suddenly everything seems to be against you, right? Maybe your job is not going well, and it's especially middle age, like when your parents are sick, your kids are having problems, like you feel everything's kind of turned upside down.
Um,
But I think that's why in this book is very, it's very grounding because you read this book, you say, hey, this is how we work. Has, as what Ken just said, the way we react has been the case since when we were animals, since before we were human beings. So understanding how we function, right? And then also just understanding what drove our behavior. And also, knowing, as Ken has laid out very beautifully in this book multiple times, like there are ways out. There are things to manage them. There are things you can do. There are things you can say to yourself and to your children. Thank you for that. And with that, I want to say one of the most interesting chapter, I think, in this book, I have to say all of them are very interesting, but one of the most practical chapter I found in this book is chapter 7. Again, get a copy of the book yourself and you'll find chapter 7. It's it's about language. You call it language of resilience because we all like resilient, right? So we all know this is a positive word, and we all know this is a goal we want to have for our children and for ourselves. But oftentimes what we're lacking is that, okay, what do we do? Like, what do we say when our kids are kind of stuck on their video games, or don't or doesn't want to go to school. Like, what language do we use to communicate? And there's an entire chapter, chapter 7 in the book, all about language. And then there is 2 columns, like things you do not say and things you say for the same situation. It's very practical. With that, can I ask you, Ken, to say a few things, like what are the common things we say wrong? Because I'm sure the reason you put this chapter is that you've heard so many ways of, saying it not right, and then also kind of things you can do or you can say
Um,
to make things
so,
right.
so it so happens to be, Yinuo, that that's my favorite chapter as well. Um,
Yay!
and what I've learned over the years is that people find most helpful of everything I do, of everything I put on the internet, find most helpful the say this, not that. And the reason that they're helpful is that in many cases, the things you shouldn't say at first glance seem nicer. They seem sweeter. They seem like you're solving a problem. So before I give you some examples, I want your audience to listen to what I'm trying to communicate on a broader scale. Because if you understand it on a higher level, you don't need my tables. They might start, but you can make your own, right? And so the first thing is we don't solve problems for kids. We don't minimize them and say that they're not real, nor do we maximize them, right? We just state that they're real and they exist. And rather than trying to solve a problem by saying, let me do that for you, we communicate that we trust in the child's ability, or the teenager's, or probably your wife or husband's ability to solve it on their own with you standing by their side. The other thing is we don't answer for kids. We not only don't solve problems, but we don't answer for kids. We are a sounding board that invites them to begin to give their solutions, their thoughts, feelings, and problem solving. So again, no minimizing, maximizing, or denying. We don't problem solve. We invite people to problem solve knowing that we think they have the capacity to do so. And we engage them to think. So with that said, I don't have the charts in front of me, but let me give you some things off the top of my head. Um, if Let's talk about the emotional child. Let's talk about me. So I was and always have been really sensitive and really thoughtful. And that is the best thing about me. That's my superpower. It's also what led me into a depression before I figured out how to use my superpower, right? So the comments that I would hear as an adolescent all the time were people trying to tell me that I shouldn't be hurting. So they would say things like, you're too sensitive. This is not a big deal. Or you're thinking too hard. Just let it go. Well, those statements are denying who I am, and they're shutting me down instead of dealing with my reality. So, what should people have said? Your sensitivity is the best thing about you, but it can also be really hard to feel that much inside. In the long run, it's going to make you a better father and partner and colleague, but for now, it's hurting. Your challenge right now is to think about how to manage your sensitivity. Let's come up with a plan. Thoughtfulness. The best thing about you is how much you think. Your challenge is that thinking about things can get really exhausting and overwhelming. And you're going to have to learn how to take that gift of thoughtfulness and figure out what you can handle at any moment and set the other things aside. So that's for a teenager in emotional distress. But let's look at the little kid. I used to teach nursery school, Yinuo. And what I can tell you, even when you teach nursery school, is if you say to a 2.5-year-old, let me do that for you, what do? They go, no, me, right? Why? Because even the 2.5-year-old knows that the statement, let me do that for you, is really saying either
I don't have the patience to wait for you to figure it out, or it's really saying you can't do it yourself. And kids reject that. Another thing we do with younger kids, or for that matter, teenagers, is we say you're too young to understand. Never, ever, 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 ever say you're too young to understand to any human being, because that denies them the ability to grow, and it denies all the fun of being a parent, which is to figure out what they already do know. So start with, tell me what you understand. Let's go from there, right? And we invite them. So those are some examples of things to say. And let me do one other one. You never begin with a teenager by saying, I think. The second you begin going, I think, the teenager is going, blah, 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 and they're not listening to you. You begin with, tell me what you think. Then you listen. And then when you listen, you learn who your teenager really is.
Thank you. Those are beautiful. So at least you know what not to say. Don't say, I think. At least don't start with it. And do
Yeah.
not say you're too young to understand.
Never.
And
I think
as a guy who's an old man, may I say that you also should not say to a guy like me, you're too old to understand, because that doesn't feel good either.
that's right. I was just attacked by my daughter who's 10 and showing me how ChatGPT can show how Gen X talks. I was like, oh, you're too old to understand. That's offensive. Well, thank you so much. And so remember this too. If you avoid this too, like you're avoiding two of the biggest landmines, right? Don't say you're too young to understand or start a sentence with I think. And what you did, that's a beautiful example, Ken. I think you basically did 3 steps, right? So one is you acknowledge their quality instead of dismiss it. Because I think oftentimes we become dismissive. You're just too sensitive. That's very dismissive. You acknowledge it. And then you see the positive side of it. Because any quality has a positive side, right? Even the ones that you're sensitive, you're shy, and they all have a positive sense to it. So like one is acknowledging. And second, also acknowledging that quality brings you some pain, right? And then also not dismissing that and saying you're really suffering from it. And that's really bringing you some problems and some troubles that you're in. And third, basically, you show a commitment of working with them and turning into that quality into a positive force in their life.
Yeah.
Right? So
That
those
was
are
a magnificent summary, Yinuo. Magnificent summary. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's exactly what you're doing. You're doing it so easily, but because you're a master, because you've been doing this for 4 decades. But for all of us, we can think that way. You're basically doing 3 steps, right? So you basically you have a you break it down, and then that's exactly what you're being role modeling us. So thank you so much, Ken. And then for our readers, again, if you get the book, it's on page 54. So do get a book in the link below. And then this is the table I was talking about, where Ken really laid out how you should say it and how you should avoid saying. And those are all beautifully translated by our publisher for the Chinese version. So I'll just read a couple. Sorry, Ken, you won't understand, but our audience will. So for example, you talked about what to do when you're in getting into a kind of a hairy problem. So you should avoid saying let me help you. and you should say how do you think you will solve this problem. So 不要说让我帮你吧，而说你认为你会怎么解决这个问题呢？ Okay. And then the second one saying that, okay, let's start. How to solve a problem. Do not say 直接开始吧, let's start right now. Rather, what you should say is that 一步一步来，你每完成一小部分，就证明了一次自己可以做到，就不会感到那么茫然失措了。So basically what you should say is that I'm translating live back to English, saying you take one step at a time. So every time you accomplish something, even a small portion, that shows that you can do it. So then you won't feel lost anymore.
That,
So this
by
is
the way, Yinuo, is the first step of stress management. Break big
Mm.
problems into small pieces. So this is all coming together. Keep going, and you don't have to translate for me in English. I love what you're doing, and you use as much Chinese as your audience would like.
Yeah, so this is excellent. And I think the other one is talking about when kids ask you for help, right? So there's a category say, when they can help. And then, so you should not say, 一个强大的人会自己度过困难时期的啊，somebody who's strong can can endure this yourself. You should say rather, 一个强大的人知道如何向他人寻求帮助. A strong person knows how to seek help. Now you should not say, 那就让它过去吧，just let it pass. You should say this will take some time. 就会花点时间。你会说，除了你自己的勇气，你还会得到那些真心在乎你的人对你的支持，这些会帮助你治愈你内心的创伤。哇，so beautifully said. Anyway, just saying that, other than your own courage, you will also actually, once you seek help, you will receive support from people who truly care about you, and this will help you heal and help you move forward. Again, this is like this is basically glittering gold. If you didn't see it, every single one of them is very simple. This basically it's something you can use today. Once you get this book, you can start saying this to your children because you talk to them every day, right? And then you can just read this page. So remember, when you get this book, page 53 and 54 in the Chinese version. So if you don't read anything else, read these 2 pages. Ken has laid out what, very, basically, I think all the tough situations we could have faced with our children and things to say and things that you should avoid. Again, get the link, click the link and get the book, and you will benefit from it from today. All right. And thank you, Ken, again, for that brilliant demonstration. And then, so like going back to the book is very rich in content. We talked about chapter 5, talk about chapter 7. The book itself has 40 chapters, if I remember right? It has like 40 chapters. Yeah. And one of the things you talked a lot about is we go back a little bit, you touched it, is managing stress for adults. Although you don't see them in the office, you probably see them as somebody who come with the children. But what are the what are the common patterns you see in parents, like in managing their own side of either stress or the language they have with themselves? And what are some of your advices for the parents in fixing relationship with themselves rather than focusing on the children, as you said?
It's a really beautiful question. And then we begin by reminding ourselves that it's one of the most important things we can do as parents. It shows that we're emotionally healthy and kids like that. It also, if we're in relationship with another human being, a romantic or partnering relationship, it's going to also make, when you have a stronger sense of self, meaning you know how to take care of yourself, you're actually going to be in relationship with someone else better. And that's good for our children to see those healthy relationships. But what can we do? It's actually very similar to what we're asking kids to do. We can stop being so hard on ourselves, not expect ourselves to be perfect. We can understand that what rejuvenates us is a sense of meaning and purpose. So if what you're doing at work is something that itself doesn't give you a lot of meaning, then find relationships at work, but do something at home to give back to your community or that makes you feel like you have a very strong purpose. But then we do the very concrete stuff. We show our children how important it is to set time aside to relax, to sleep, to eat well, and to exercise. All of these things actually change our body and our mind and our ability to manage stress. And above all, you talked about, when you were giving the list of the say this, not that, one of the things you said is not a strong person handles it, but that a strong person seeks support from others. And this is an amazing thing for us to demonstrate. And it's going to pay off in multiple ways, which I'm going to get to in a minute. But when we demonstrate that we're having a bad day, and therefore we call a friend, go for a walk with a friend, seek professional support, whatever it is that we do, we are demonstrating to our child that it is the sense of belonging and human connection that gets us through things, right? And that is profoundly important for kids to see. But now let's talk about why taking care of yourself, if you don't mind me interviewing myself with this question, but why is it that it is such a gift to our children? Because ultimately, you want your child to come to you when they need you the most, when they're troubled. You want to know your child. And when we focus only on grades or performance, we know what is too easy to see, but not their inner life, and we're not able to really be there for them. At the same time, children, especially children who receive messages that they should be perfect in some way, don't come to their parents if they're going to be a burden, right? So whether it is that you are so demanding of your child that you insist that they get all good grades, they're not going to come to you to be a burden. But what if you are in a painful relationship? If you've had a disease, if you've just lost a parent, then you too are suffering. And your child is seeing you suffer. And when they see you suffer, they're not going to add anything to burden you. And as a result, they become perfect little girls and boys. And what we need to communicate is that we have the bandwidth for them. Does that translate? The bandwidth for them? Does that translate? Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
the room for
yeah,
them.
have
And
capacity,
yeah,
right?
capacity. That would be the right. So that we
Yeah.
have the capacity or the room. And the way we communicate that is by demonstrating that we're okay. We're taking care of ourselves. When things get added to us, we seek out support. But sometimes we also have to very concretely say to our children, you don't honor me when you spare me. There are many things that are going on in my life. I have this condition, this disease, and I love that you want to care for me. But when you don't let me be your parent, you're taking away what matters most to me, which is my ability to be there for you. So I beg you to definitely care for and about me, but don't spare me. Instead, honor me by letting me be in your life. And I will create the capacity, the room to be able to handle it because I will turn to my sister. I will turn to my parent. I will turn to, I don't know, whoever. And that is the way we're really there when our kids need us.
Hmm. Thank you. It's so beautifully said. I think there's something really touching in your book. I forgot which chapter. Maybe it's the same same place where you talk about managing stress for adults. You talked about sometimes seeking professional help. For example, if I, as a parent, feel I have anxiety or I have some mental, issues, or mental illness even, and then there's often a element of shame connected to it. So basically, I think in the book you said it's probably the bravest act you can take to seek professional help. I think that's really touching because I'm sure because you are a doctor, so people go to you when they're sick, right? And being sick isn't a good thing. And then, people don't want to be known I'm sick. And then probably for a parent, it's even harder to acknowledge like I am sick. Like, it's okay to take the daughter or the son to see a doctor. But I think that's deeply touching as well. Because that's really true with some of the data I see in China. Because there was a blue called a white book that came out and talked about for children who have anxiety or mental illness, there's a much higher chance their parents actually suffer from it as well. Can you say a few things about that? Especially, I'm sure some of our audience are probably in that situation.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure I can say it any more beautifully than you already did, right? I really mean that. You really made the point that we belong to each other, and it's not uncommon that suffering on some level is intergenerational, and that when we show people that we are deserving of getting well, then we take away all the shame and stigma from the help seeking process. And when you take care of yourself now, maybe it'll pay off now when your child is 10, you know what, maybe, but I guarantee you that when they're 40 or 50 and they need support themselves, they'll seek it without shame when they saw their mother or their father see that taking care of yourself is what we need to do. So it's a profoundly positive thing. It is what gives you the room to take care of other people is to take care of yourself first. There's so many beautiful metaphors that make this point. I'll give you two that we hear all the time. One is, you're on a plane and you put on your oxygen mask first, right? Why do you do that? Because if you're not okay, you're not going to make the kids okay. And the other one that is very beautiful is that the heart pumps blood to itself first, which is a fact. The first artery that comes out of the human heart rejuvenates, nourishes, and oxygenates the human heart. That's the first artery. It pumps blood to itself. And so we take care of ourselves to show that it's okay, and because we deserve it. Um, you know, um, yeah. So,
Thank you. Yeah, heart pumps blood to itself first. And I think now I'll go back to the book. I think other than my most favorite chapter, chapter 7, the second favorite chapter I had is chapter 25. And I have to make a correction. I think it's 49 or 50 chapters instead of 40. So 25 is sort of in the middle. So the chapter 7 talk about language you can use when you are speaking. And chapter 25 talked about the art and performance of listening. That's probably even harder because I think that's connected to what you just talked about, the capacity, right? So to listen probably takes more capacity or more bandwidth, because to say something out of your mind, frankly, is easier compared to listening. So for our readers who hasn't read that chapter yet, what are the things you want to share in that chapter with our readers?
it makes all the difference, especially with adolescents. Remember when, it's funny, your favorite chapter is what to say, what not to say, language of resilience. And remember how the example that popped into my mind is you don't start conversations with I think. That's what this chapter is about, right? Is we are to be like a sounding board. Tell me if that translates. Does that translate? Okay. Like ideas should bounce off of us. And, you know, remember before I said, why do we love? So that people know that they're worthy of being loved? Why do we listen? So people know they're worthy of being heard. And for an adolescent, when you are listening first, you're allowing them to problem solve, to bounce ideas off of you. They will make mistakes in the imaginary world instead of the real world. So let's imagine now you have a child who's not doing well. You come in and you tell them what to do. You haven't greased their own minds. They haven't built their own skills. And the chances of them going out and doing exactly what you said is very small. But now imagine you listen. There's two things that are going to occur. One is that they will think out loud and come up with the plans, which means they own the solutions. And when they own the solutions in the real world, they're less likely to make mistakes. But there's another piece. And the other piece is that
they will make mistakes in the imaginary world. They'll go, I'm going to do blah, 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 blah. And then they're going to go, and then you can just casually say, well, what will your friends say then? And then they're going to go, oh, they would. Oh, they would. And then they understand what's going to happen. They act it out, and there are fewer mistakes in the real world, right? And the other thing is, listening allows you to know your child, how they think, what they care about, what they choose to share with you. Do you see how different this is than grade focused relationships, performance based relationships? So I don't know if this will work in Chinese, but I remember, I think it's Madeline Levine, one of my wonderful colleagues who writes, who I think this is her line, but she says, what we want to do is transform, is make our kids understand we want them to be human beings, not human doings. It's who they be, who they are, not what they do or perform. And we get that by listening. And if you talk too soon, you only see the stuff that's easy to see.
That's that's very deep. So I think the human being, human doing part, this is very special in English language, of course. It's called
Yeah.
human but I think people get it. It's saying like, because usually I say this in my workshops too. This is, like we have three levels. We have being, and being drives our doing, and doing drives our having, right? And then, but oftentimes we focus the opposite. We want to seek the having, right? So what do you want to, when you think about what do you want to be when you grow up, oftentimes we think very concrete terms. Okay, I want this size house. I want 2 cars. I want this degree, right? But then saying, okay, but those are a result of your choices, of doing, of your behavior, of the efforts. And this actually was driven by the being, like how you see yourself in your values, your connection with the world. And also, I like the word that you mentioned multiple times in the book about interdependence, and how you see interdependence as a family, as a community. And those things actually drive your doing. And then that drives your having, right? So it's
If having is what would drive you, you're never going to have enough. You're never
exactly.
going to, because there's always more. If relationships are what drive you, you can be deeply satisfied with your daily life and with whatever you have. And I have no problem with having a nice house. I have no problem with it. It's just not what should define you.
Yeah, yeah. I want to pose a question to you for, I often heard very common from my readers is that sometimes when kids go to teenage, they just don't want to talk to the parents anymore. Like many parents say, well, yeah, I want to be a listener, but they don't want to talk to me, right? Like they don't, they come home and shut their doors. And like, how do I get started? Even if I want to be a useful listener, where do I start?
Yeah. So, first off, I promise you that you're going to hear more when you listen more and talk less. I promise you that. The other thing that I will tell you is that you shouldn't force it. And again, this could be cultural. So I'm really going to count on you, Yinuo, to tell me if what I'm saying is cultural and incorrect. But in general, boys in the US are more likely to choose silence, and girls are more likely to kind of talk and tell you what they feel. Is that
Yeah, it's the same
in your
here.
culture as well?
Right.
So,
Yes.
so I can tell you, because I used to be a boy, and depending on how you define a boy, I still am. And what I can tell you is boys have rich, deep feelings. They just don't necessarily express them. And they're less likely to express them when you sit down, you look them in the eye, and you go, what do you think? What do you feel? Tell me. So you choose um, talking in the car while you're looking at other people. And you also, no teenager likes you to go, tell me what your friends are doing, right? But you can be driving,
you can see a group of teens and you can say, what's going on there? Right? And you begin conversations, but you're avoiding the eye contact. Similarly, having conversations in the dark while you're going for a walk or around a fire is beautiful. Another trick with boys is to move. To move. You know what the hardest thing about this interview is for me? I'm enjoying every minute of it. Remember, it's in my evening after a 12-hour workday, but I'm enjoying every minute. You want to know what's really the hardest for me? Sitting still for 2 hours is torture for this old man who's a boy. And if you ever hear me speak or do trainings, I'm like walking around the room, jumping up and down. Sitting is torture, as it is for most boys. And so you throw a ball, or if a kid comes in my office, I give them the swivel chair, and the mother says, "Sit still and talk to Dr. Ken." And I'm like, "No, do whatever you want." And the kids spin, and when they spin, then they're talking to me, right? All right. So, with that said, I want to make a deep spiritual point, and I'm going to use another one of my favorite metaphors, which you may remember. In adolescence, it is very common for adolescents to choose periods of silence, even to push their parents away, right? And it is heartbreaking to have a good conversationalist with a child who used to put their head on your shoulders, hold your hands down the street, and suddenly they're not talking to you, right? It's heartbreaking. So what is going on? We raise children and imagine them as like baby birds in this nest. And the nest is fluffy and warm and it's cozy. And one or two birds, big birds, bring you these big juicy worms, and you just go like, and you get the worms, right? Please do not make that a still for the show. And so the you have the and life is good. And then what happens is brain puberty occurs, which is about a year before any signs in your body that you're beginning to develop. So you have brain puberty. And when you have brain puberty, there's a message that happens inside which says, I'm going to have to learn to fly from this nest. It is painful. It is confusing. As a result, when puberty begins, you look at the big birds bringing you the big juicy worms, and you're like, I don't really need you. I could have found my own worms. And you sometimes become embarrassed by the way they breathe because you don't want them around. And you look at this nest that's warm and cozy and fluffy, and you're like, actually, it's kind of prickly. I don't want to stay here much longer. And then adolescence occurs, continues to years go by, and now you're ready to leave. You look at that nest, you don't see it as prickly anymore. You see it as uninhabitable. Otherwise, Yinuo, you would never fly. So this is a developmental process. But let me make two very clear points. And I will tell you that when I speak to audiences, these are the points that make them cry. Okay? Point number one, the reason your child is pushing you away is not because they hate you. It's because they love you so much it hurts. Pause. I'm going to say it again. The reason your child pushes you away is because they love you so much it hurts. That's number one. Number two, you're going to have to tell me if this translates to Chinese culture. But in American culture, when our children leave, the term we use is empty nest. Is that a Chinese term as well?
Yeah, it's called 空巢. It's basically a very similar
Yeah,
concept.
we probably take it from you. And
Yeah.
so the it's a toxic term. It's a toxic term. You don't want an empty nest. Emptiness, the word empty is an offensive term. What you want is for your children to be in flight. They've left, but they're also welcome to return. And when our children are pushing us away and saying the nest is prickly, if we go, no, it's not. No, it's not. It's good. I feed you. I give you. Don't you understand?
maybe Chinese parents don't talk like that, but if they're like just demanding like that, then the kids just back off and fly away. When instead you give them the space, you understand this is a temporary phase, you're available when they ask you, you never stop loving them, you never stop caring for them, you still bring them the worms, but you know they can feed themselves, then you don't have an empty nest when they leave. You have what I have, which is your kids being in flight and showing up like my daughter did 3 or 4 hours ago, just showing up in my kitchen, screaming down the basement, going, "Hey, want a hug?" She just showed up. That's what you want.
Ah, so beautiful. Yeah. So I love how you said that I think that's again that's actually in Kane's book as well, talk about the emptiness being a toxic term because it's hurtful, right? It's a hurtful term. It's saying like, well, suddenly I'm empty, meaning like missing something. Like, you're used to be a full circle, now you're missing a slice, like a pizza, and suddenly you're never whole. And then the feeling of never whole is hurting. So that's beautiful, saying like, we're still whole, but we're just moving into a different model, right? The model is that, as you said, is they're in flight. You're still you still have your airport here, and they can come back and refuel and then check in. Thank you for that. And I want to go back to what you said earlier. There's so many golden nuggets in all your shares. That's why part of the reason I want to unpack a bit of what you said, because it's such a high concentration of wisdoms. Let's dilute it a little bit. You talk about when you're swirling in the chair, and then how boys function. That's so powerful because I have two boys and a girl, and then I observe how they're different. And then, of course, I didn't grow up as a boy, so I didn't know much. And I have to say, there are many publications on that as well now, saying that the modern day school system isn't really for boys, right? Because you require them to go in at age 6 or 7 and sit down, and still and be still, and then and most girls, frankly, can do that. It's much easier. For boys, they tend to move around and do things, and that's being labeled as being naughty or disruptive of the class discipline or whatever, and they get punished for that. So that's thank you so much for speaking for the boys. So if you're a boy, or if you're a parent, if you're a father, or if you're a mother of a son, please do listen to that again and saying things like, how do you work with a boy? And when you're saying that, I just recognize that same thing. Like, my chair is a swirly chair. I bought a swirly chair for my kids because I think they tend to do that. I think, oh, then do it, because I don't want to sit them still. And it actually helps, because when they're thinking they want to do this kind of thing, or they kind of play with a pen, or they're kicking a ball around. And frankly, at the beginning, I was kind of annoyed as well. I was like, can't you just listen to me? Like, no. But that's exactly as you said. That's how they
are
function.
listening. That's how they listen.
Right, that's how they listen, exactly. And then that's so, like, when you're listening, we're seeing a boy doing that, you should congratulate yourself, say, they're listening. So thank you so much for pointing that out, because I think that language is missing, and in China as well, because school, is still so much, probably more in Asia than the US, is about conformity, is about coming and behave in the same way. They're the same standard and all that. Of course, there is a boy-girl gender difference. Of course, I'm sure you know very well, even within boys, there's a huge spectrum for the girls as well. So just recognizing our developmental nature and the truth about who we are as a human race. That's what I said when I read your book. It's something so fundamental and basic, but get lost when we are sort of swirled into the education system.
So I agree with you, and I love the fact that you said that while we make these generalities, each human is an individual, right? So it's true that I love the fact that you pointed out just the fact that girls can sit still doesn't mean that that's their preferred model, but boys have more trouble sitting still. And I shared with you earlier that, or maybe this was in another conversation, but I shared with you that, or with someone today, that boys weren't supposed to feel when I was growing up. And that's an example of a gender stereotype that was truly incorrect, right? boys were to suppress their feelings, it didn't mean that they weren't feeling. So we want to be careful with this generalities, but not deny biology, right? And we live in a world where um, exactly as we become more and more academic and put things more packed academically and take away things like recess and child play, we're setting up for all kids to not do as well, but for boys to really fail. I
Mm.
was one of those boys that was disruptive. And I was one of those boys who talked too much and moved too much. And I was one of those boys who wasn't living up to expectations because everybody knew my IQ and my grades were not matching my IQ. And I did okay, right? I did okay once I figured myself out.
Yeah, thank you. More than okay. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And then again, as I said, the book is just littered with gems and golden nuggets. And then I would recommend because it took me. I mean, the entire week, as I said, I was immersed in your book because I want to prepare for this interview. And then I just realized one of the things that came to mind is especially when I go after chapter by chapter, it's a bit of like a encyclopedia almost because it's a very generous range of topics that you're probably exhausted all the situations you're going to encounter. So do get a copy of the book. And then I have one suggestion when you read the book. So don't try to rush it because this is not a novel. Like you don't need to rush it to the end to see what's it. And then the way I feel beneficial reading this book, you can almost treat each chapter separately other than the introduction and the beginning, which set up the frame. But each chapter almost is like a little bit of a prescription book of a certain type of problems. So do get a copy of the book, and I'm sure you will benefit as much as I do, or probably even more. And Ken, I know we have quite some time. I want to go, two last questions, one related to the book, one related to yourself, if you don't mind. So in the book, one of the really lighthearted chapter is the importance of having fun. I remember, is it that's the importance of having fun or being
The
happy with.
importance of play to childhood.
Here you go. Importance of play to childhood. Yeah, and then why don't we sort of end on that chapter because it's so fundamental, but often get dismissed, especially when kids go to teenage. And that's something I struggle as well. My oldest son is 14. So it feels like, well, play seems to be a childhood or distant thing. So how do we kind of still fill our life with playfulness?
Yeah, I love that you asked that question. I've written, I don't know, I think my 10th book is coming out in a couple of months. I have a toolkit on how to talk to kids that is literally this thick, and on the internet it's 10 times bigger. And I have internet pages. Why did I tell you that? Because of everything I've ever written, of everything I've ever done, the thing that had the largest press impact was a 5 or 6 page article I wrote for the American Academy of Pediatrics that was about protecting play. It didn't say anything brilliant. I mean, it was well referenced, but it literally said, play is good. Kids are supposed to play. And Yinuo, I was all over the world making statements about something that is so obvious, I didn't even understand why people were paying attention, right? So I've had this 40-year career, and that is what everybody heard. And why? First of all, I'm not sure why, but let me take a guess. The job of childhood is to play. It's how you learn to make mistakes, how you recover, how you foster imagination, how you learn to play with yourself and with groups, right? To be able to collaborate, to bargain. It's how you learn that exercise makes you feel better. It's how you learn that taking a break is how you can restore your ability to have new knowledge and to work harder the minute later. So, like, play is inherently the job of childhood. It's trying on different hats. There's so much to it. So
the statement I wrote that got so much attention was to protect play because there were forces in the universe that were interfering with play. Like in the US, shorter recesses, right? For example, or just this high stakes, high pressure culture that is saying it's more important to study than to play. And someone, and it happened to be me, had to say, no, play is how children learn. So now let's leave childhood. Everybody agrees with me when you're 4. But now let's enter the school age. Now, what I will tell you during school age is play is how you solidify lessons. So if you learn, the human brain needs downtime to remember things. If you're learning all day, it goes in your brain and out at the end of the day. When you take a break, go to a different subject, or play, then your knowledge actually gets solidified. Now let's go to adolescence. So some adolescents are so cool that they won't admit that they like to play, but they do. Um, and and whether it's a video game or hanging out or playing a game or playing a game of football or soccer, whatever it is, they like to play. But for adolescents, we shouldn't just be talking about play. We should also be talking about downtime and reflection time so that we have the adolescent emotional brain is brilliant. They're taking in so much information. They need downtime to be able to reflect and incorporate that knowledge. Now, let's talk about adults. I'm not an adult. I don't know anything about adults except for pretending I am one occasionally, right? But don't you like to have fun? I mean, I've had so much fun in this interview. And part of the reason is how real you are, how interactive you are, how we are laughing together, but we're talking about very serious subjects. And what makes it easier to learn? The fact that we're keeping it light and enjoyable, right? Right?
Yeah.
If we took away the smiles, if we took away the metaphors about the nest and the butt and the blood, it would have been so much harder to not learn this stuff in a playful, enjoyable manner. Adults never stop wanting to have play. But for us, it's more like connecting with another human and having fun.
Absolutely, exactly. And I have to guarantee you, I think for our audience is the same. Maybe they don't remember your references. They remember the swirling chair, they remember the butt, they remember the heart, pumping blood to itself. That those things actually that's how we function as human beings. We love stories, we love metaphors, right? We love lighthearted conversations.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Exactly. And then I wanted to stress that point exactly for that reason, because I think sometimes parenting becomes a torture almost. It's toil for sure for most people. They feel like it's such a hard job, a hard work, and then it's very painful. Painful both physically and also emotionally. So I think having that kind of almost connecting to the child within ourselves, giving us a different perspective in looking at those issues, right? And then I think that's where the wisdom of that chapter.
And allow yourself to have the joy in childhood. What is more fun than watching your toddler learn to walk on wobbly legs? What is more satisfying than watching your adolescent try on different hats, imagining who they might be, right?
Yeah.
Enjoy this. People like to be enjoyed. And it doesn't mean I want you to be your kids' friends, but I do want you to enjoy them and for them to know that parenting doesn't feel like a burden. Is it hard sometimes? Yeah, but it doesn't feel like a burden. It feels like a privilege. Let them know that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. All right, last question, and hopefully it's also a reasonably lighthearted one. to yourself, because I think probably many readers like myself wonder how you were as a father. Okay, and then that's kind of in addition to your professional capacity. So if you still recall during the teenage years of your kids, I wonder if you look back now, what are some of the things you say the most often, or what are the 3 sentences you most often say to your children back then that now looking back you feel it worked, and something that's as a wisdom you can pass on to our readers today?
Without a shadow of a doubt, it was "I love you" as the most important statement. Um, I literally do not end a single day of my life without a text telling my 29-year-old kids that I love them. So that may sound sappy, but that's it. And I have to tell you that I I really, I wasn't a perfect parent. We all make mistakes, but I really parented in the way that we're talking about, in the sense that I really enjoyed them. Oh my gosh, did I enjoy them? They're identical little girls, and they're so, so different despite being identical. And I enjoyed them so much, and they knew it. And for that reason, I don't feel like they felt like they were a burden to me. Um, and I definitely was most excited by, like, if I tell you all the stories of childhood I remember, the things that moved me, I could speak for hours about their developing sense of humor, their overwhelming sense of compassion, right? And I don't remember any specific grade. I really don't, because none of that mattered. Did they work hard? They did. They did. I expected them to apply themselves. Oh, but I want to make one other key point. I allowed them to be uneven. That's where we go wrong. This would be a great way to end this interview, even though it's not lighthearted. Is that okay?
Of course, yes. Elaborate, please.
We go wrong when we apply high standards, for example, academics, and expect it to be across the board. Right now, Yinuo, you are interviewing the most uneven human being on earth. I can work with a kid and a family. I can tell you what they feel. I can tell you whether they're talking or not. I can tell you what they're experiencing. It's almost like that's my superpower. I can't change a tire, right? The other day we went to an event, and we went in 2 separate cars. My wife's battery died in her car, and thank God she knew what to do. I can save a human's life, but from my point of view, taking these wires and putting them in cars was a recipe for death, right? Like, I am the most uneven human being on earth. And when you accept your unevenness, it takes away your anxiety. And it's more than that, it allows your excellence to sprout, right? Um, I didn't have time to do car mechanics because medical school was hard, right? And and eh, when we accept people's unevenness, we allow their strengths to come out, and we allow them not to hate themselves for their limitations. And I'm certain I parented in that way. But, we could also talk about mistakes I made, but I'm sure I did that. But the simple answer to your question, I guarantee you, it was "I love you." And it was never an empty statement. I mean, sometimes I just do it, "I love you" heart. But it's "I love you" because, like, make it real, right? I love you because you are so incredibly compassionate. I love that you supported your friend today. I love that you give me joy. Give it the full sentence so it actually has meaning. And love is about being seen.
Mm.
Make sure your children know they're really seen.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. And so that I think it's so interesting because I've asked this question to to many authors I've interviewed, this is the most consistent thing people say. Like everybody, well, that would be the first thing that came out. And I want to say that because especially in the East Asian culture, to verbalize it is sometimes embarrassing. Okay, so like it's an act of love. It's so interesting. You probably know there's a book called, 5 Languages of Love. So for Asian, the most pronounced language of love is feeding you food. So your parents would cook for you and without saying much, right? And then they probably know what's your favorite dish, and then without saying, but as you said, I think this age of children, there's much more similarity. I mean, that's probably thanks to the development of internet or of the world of globalization. Then so people actually want to hear that. And then but sometimes it's not because we're selfish. It's just it's sometimes it's not culturally used to it. And then so that's why I'm saying that is that's something I do with my kids as well. Like every time they leave the house, every time they come back, I love you and a hug. And actually in this book there was a chapter on hugging. I love it where you put it out there. So thank you for confirming that once again. And I like how you said it's not just about the sentence, it's about having your children know that you see them and everybody need to be seen. And I also love the point about being uneven, because I think that's also true, because I think again, in this book, there's one chapter about media and social media literacy. And one of the impact many research has shown of social media on teenage is that there seems to be a perfect image, especially for girls, right? So you have to look certain way, your hair to be certain way, like, your body shape has to be certain way. And that brings a lot of anxiety. But although that's for teenage girls, but it's actually true in everybody's mind. It seems to be a perfect image. And whenever we compare to that perfect image, we fail somewhere, right? There are things I do, and I can even say, well, you can't, you're American dad, you don't know how to fix a car battery. Like, what a shame, right? So there are many, like very, I would say, criticisms that's almost viewed as acceptable because of this perfect image we're all striving to live up to. And thank you for saying that. I guess everybody is vulnerable to a certain extent, and nobody is a perfect circle. If there is a perfect circle, that's fake. So being able to allow yourself to be not perfect and even using your word and make it visible to your children, right? I think that's actually very powerful. And thank you for doing that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, I know we're over time and it's very late for you, and then you have been sitting there in your most uncomfortable position for like an hour and a half. Lastly, any last word you want to say to our audience before we wrap it up?
No, it's been an absolute privilege to have this conversation, and that's it. I authentically feel honored to have had this conversation across cultures, and yeah, kids want to know that you see them, and that you care about them. And you know what? You wouldn't be watching this interview if you didn't believe that in your soul, right? So you're already most of the way there.
Wow, that's so sweet. Thank you so much. Again, everybody, if you like this conversation, get a copy of this book. Again, you can find it on the link below. And I think you will, once you have the book, you can listen to a replay of this interview. Then you can have Ken's voice guiding you through this book and through our lives and our most important chapters with our children. All right. Okay. With that, thank you so much again, Ken. And thank you all for listening.